Hey, Comcovers. All right, so we're going to continue our Iran frame on society. Hopefully, yesterday you watched the social movement videos of the Green Movement and then the protests that surrounded the downing of the Ukrainian plane. That was part of a larger movement, protest movement that's been going on since 2017, starting with uh, the revolution of rising expectations. The idea is that things are going all right, and then there was a little setback. In this case, it was food prices started to go higher. A lot of it had to do with the sanctions put in place against Iran by the Trump administration. All right, so more on that in a minute. So we are going into political participation, main idea C. And one of the things that we'll see that the Iranian people are particularly high voter turnout. And this is largely because the population is predominantly young. Um, and so there is individual rights for protests, civil liberties, and rights that were written to the Constitution in 1979. And despite these guarantees that are in the Constitution, the Islamic Republic has closed down newspapers, labor unions, private organizations, political parties, particularly under the hardliner um, presidents like Ahmadinejad. So, despite these infringements and guarantees on civil liberties, uh, people protest. And they, particularly among the young population, 50% of the population is under 35 years old. And as a result, they're more likely to protest. They're more politically active because their futures are, um, are a little uncertain. And they have less to lose. So we do see that younger populations tend to be more volatile. And so part of the protest movement is this secular movement against the wearing of the hijab or the headscarf. 70% of voters in 2017 turned out to vote in the presidential election, which is up from the 2016 Majlis elections, which was about 62%. Now, granted, presidential elections are going to have higher voter turnouts than congressional elections, but we are seeing a relatively high voter turnout as opposed to pretty much all of our other countries, which do not have that same experience. And people participate um, and in their governments to a larger extent in Iran, but people who actually achieve office are largely recruited through people who participated in the Islamic Revolution of 1979 or religious leaders. Those tend to be the ones that gain office in Iran. So, media. So, similarly, we're seeing that despite there are guarantees in the Constitution for freedom of the press, we do not see that actually happening in Iran. So, there is a combination of public and private ownership of media, but it's all subject to heavy censorship. So, 80% of Iranians get their news from state run media. Many of the independent medias were shut down after the revolution of 1979. Radio and television are government run Islamic Republic of Iran Broadcasting, the IRIB, but many newspapers and magazines are privately owned. Um, Compared to other countries in the region, Iran's press has more freedom due to an educated society, but we are also comparing it to like Saudi Arabia, so the bar is not particularly high. Journalists are more often jailed than other Middle Eastern countries, according to Reporters Without Borders. So it's really dangerous to be a journalist in Iran. There is a history of jailing and persecuting journalists there. Okay, so our big topic in Iran society is going to be political culture and socialization. So I'm just introducing right now. This is not in your frame. This is just introduction. And Islam is the identifying, unifying component within Iran's political culture. One of the things that we're also going to see, and you're going to see this in its history, leadership tends to be authoritarian but not totalitarian. So realize that there is centralization of power among political leaders, but not in control of every aspect of the individual's life. So it tends to be authoritarian, not totalitarian. Another thing is that um, we are seeing a marriage of church and state, so a union of political and religious authority. And this has been a part of Iranian society since the beginning. Um, they managed Iran to escape, for the most part, European colonization. Now, that doesn't mean that the Europeans weren't in control of various parts of the Middle East. Iran was just never officially colonized by Europe during its imperialist era, unlike Mexico and Nigeria. And then, in terms of socialization, there are various parts. The patriarchal family structure tends to reinforce a lot of the political culture. Um, Education system is pretty strong in Iran. The Cultural Revolution, which we'll get to later. TV and radio, which of course are state run. So these are the various ways that Iranian people receive their political culture. All right, so we're going to start with main idea E, and we're going to go back in time. We're doing a little bit of history, so you can kind of see all these elements that we just talked about woven into their history and therefore their political culture. So Islam. Islam is a big part of Iranian political culture, and Islam was introduced to Persia, um, and particularly Shiism, which is Shia as opposed to Sunni Islam, through invasion. So, numerous invasions by Arabs introduced Islam to the region through jihad, right? Uh, and what eventually started to culminate through time was an Iranian caliphate. I believe we've talked about caliphates already, but to remind you, a caliphate is basically a group of Muslims that are under the leadership of a caliph who is an imam, a leader, kind of the divine word of God. And to the Shias, it is directly descended from Muhammad. Uh, but as we know, some things are going to happen, which we're going to get to today, where Iran no longer has that direct descendant in Shia Islam. Instead, the Ayatollah has essentially taken on that banner. Okay, so when Iran Caliphate was defeated by the Mongols, so you had the invasion by the Arabs, right? And they introduced Islam, and we have an Iranian caliphate emerge. But it was defeated by the Mongols, this caliphate, in the 13th century. But interestingly, the Mongols actually converted to Islam. So Shiism was the established state religion by the 16th century. So part of this brief history of Islam starts with the Prophet Muhammad in 610. And so Muhammad, of course, was the great prophet. And when he died, the Shias believed that the next prophet or leader of the Muslims should be hereditary, passed to Muhammad's son in law, a guy named Ali. Sunnis, on the other hand, believed that Muhammad did not want it directly descended, and rather a group of religious clerics should choose the next caliph from this group of clerics. And so that's the Sunnis. So directly descended versus chosen by a group of religious clerics. That's the difference between Sunni and Shia. So Sunnis, when Ali was killed, the Shia opinion became a minority one, right? Ali, who was a Shia, when he was killed, the Shia opinion became a minority one, and so Shias essentially became a minority group as compared to the Sunnis. Uh, but Shias do believe that descendants of Ali are the true heirs of the uh, of the prophet, of the caliph. So the heirs are often referred to, descendants of Ali, imams. So imams were the highest religious cleric who who is the leader of the Shias, and Ali's descendants for centuries continued to rule Shia Muslims. until the 9th century, when the 12th descendant of Ali disappeared as a child. And this disappearance, this child who disappeared, became known as the hidden imam. So, this hidden imam, right, with this 12th descendant, when this child disappeared, a lot of people believed the child did not die, but instead will come back as a Messiah to rule again, to show himself, establish just rule at the end of times when injustice and corruption have reigned supreme. So this is a Messiah figure. And until this 12th Imam comes back, essentially the ulema, who were the religious scholars, were willing to give the right to rule to shahs, as long as they ruled justly. So similar to the Mandate of Heaven in China, as long as these shahs or kings rule justly, then they can take on the banner of an imam until the true 12th imam returns. So again, it's kind of like that Jesus figure where he returns. Um, all right, so by the end of the 17th century, for Shah's rule to be legitimate, he had to have the ulema's endorsement. The ulema ultimately established themselves as an institution independent of the state. So what's starting to rise up is that we're having this government existing. The ulema, who are the religious leaders, who, of course, have granted legitimacy to the Shah, and so the Shah has legitimacy because of the ulema. So we have this codependent thing going on, where the religious institution is independent of the state, and the state is independent of but they co-rule, right? In a kind of a codependency kind of thing. All right, and what became the center of Shiism was at the time, capital city of Najaf, which is in Iraq. Okay, so who are these Shahs? So the first one I'm going to talk about is this Safavid Empire. And this was a series of Shahs, again, granted power by the ulema. And they established Shia or Shiitism as part of the identity of Iran. So by the mid 17th century, 90% of the population of Iran, essentially it was Persia, was Shia. And it was ruled through Persian scribes on the one hand and Shia clerics on the other. And so, because of this dichotomy that existed, they and the huge numbers of people who lived in this ancient city, they subscribed to something called people of the book. So they tolerated various other monotheistic religions, including Judaism and Christianity and Zoroastrianism, as well as Islam, because all of these religions are monotheistic and they actually pray to the same God. So toleration of other religions is part of the political culture. Um, but the Safavid Empire experienced some hardship with the breakup of the Silk Roads. So remember when in Europe we shifted from land routes to water routes. We were moving away from the Silk Roads and more towards water routes in the age of exploration. So as a result, the Persian Empire, this Safavid Empire, starting to lose money for its large bureaucracy, for its standing army, and as a result, we're going to start to see a breakdown of the centralized state, right? A breakdown of this. So the monarchy became separated from society and lost power by 1722. All right, so we see the rise of the Qajars. This is around 1800. The Turkish people, the Qajars were Turkish people that reconquered Iran at the end of the 18th century. So when the Qajars took control, they invaded and took control of the weakened Persia under the Safavids. The Qajars are going to move the capital to Tehran, where it is today. And they, being Turkish, could not claim to be descendants of the 12 Imams of Ali. So the Shia cleric leaders uh, actually claimed more power as interpreters of Islam. And we see separation between government and religion. It did widen, but they did still coexist. And so this also coincided with the peak of European imperialism, where many of parts of the Middle East suffered land loss due to growing European empires. And we do also see, and this is more uh, for Iran than some of the other Middle Eastern countries. They weren't colonized by the British, but they did allow British and other European powers to drill for oil within um, in the southwest west region of Iran. So like BP oil started operating in southwestern Iran. Okay, so there's going to be a coup led by um, a military leader. The military at the time was called the Cossack Brigade, a military arm of the Qajars, and a leader of that military brigade, Colonel Reza Khan, is going to carry out a coup to overthrow the Qajars and institute himself essentially as the new Shah. So the coup happened in 1921, and he claimed himself Shah and established what is known as the Pahlavi dynasty. He actually changed his name from Khan to Pahlavi because Pahlavi is an ancient Persian dynasty name. So he's going to again establish an authoritarian rule, centralizing power. During this time, the Majlis also lose power. They had been a legislative body that had been a part of the Safavids and the Qajars, all of this. And we're also going to see that Pahlavis are going to do a lot to modernize Iranian women were ordered to discard their veils, and Iran essentially becomes very Western under the Pahlavis. Now, this is going to be met with a lot of resistance by those conservative religious clerics. Um, and so there's going to be some growing tension here between the conservative religious clerics and the Shah. So during World War II, Reza Pahlavi is going to align himself with the fascists and the Nazis, and as a result, he's going to be deposed in favor of his son, um, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. So Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, pictured here, was the son of Khan, and he's going to take control in 1941. Now, there was a little bit of division already happening because, again, there is a growing movement against the Shah. Because the Shah, the Reza, Muhammad Reza, as well as Reza Khan, both lived kind of lavish lifestyles and essentially did ally themselves with the British and the Americans, and so they tended to buy a lot of military products from the U.S. and Britain, and as a result, Iran went into serious debt. Not to mention their lavish lifestyles, we're going to start to see division in society. Two parties are going to emerge to challenge the Shah: the National Front, which was basically those bankers and businessmen, more modern, secular bankers and businessmen who did not like all of the authoritarianism of the Shah, and then the Tudeh Party, which is a communist party. This one was more of the working class, labor unions, that kind of thing. That's the Tudeh Party. So these two groups are going to start to rise. And there's going to be another figure. His name is Mohammad Mossadegh. Um, and he is going to be elected to the Majlis in 1944. And he kind of represented the middle class people who emphasized Iranian nationalism. So he actually had support of both the Tudeh and um, the National Front. And so, uh, as a nationalist, he's going to lead a movement to try and get rid of Russian oil, to get rid of British oil, and to have basically the oil industry for Iran. Iran for Iranians, not Iran for Russians or Iran for the British. He also was big on getting rid of corruption and all of that. And of course, the Shah was kind of the epitome of corruption at the time. So, due to the popularity of Mossadegh, the Shah is forced to appoint Mossadegh the prime minister or the premier in 1953. In that year, Shah is also forced to flee. Again, his unpopularity is going to lead to the Shah fleeing. And Mossadegh becomes basically the only leader within Iran. Unfortunately, and I don't know if you could already tell this, he was not friendly to the West, right? He wanted to get rid of Russian oil, British oil. He wanted to get rid. He wasn't in support. So of course, the Brits are going to join with the conservative military leaders of Iran and stage a coup to overthrow Mossadegh. He was arrested and sentenced to 3 years in prison. When he was released, he remained under house arrest for the rest of his life. Helping the Shah, this is the same Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, come back, was the CIA. So the US CIA helped the Shah of Iran return to power in 1953, and he will remain in power until 1979 with the Iranian Revolution. And he will continue to be a constitutional monarch and very friendly to the West. All right, so the next phase is going to be the road to the Islamic Revolution of 1979. So the Shah, very friendly to the West, is going to establish what is known as a rentier state. A rentier state is basically when a country rents its land to foreigners, and those foreigners basically profit off of Iranian land. Um, Nigeria is a rentier state, and so was Iran, a rentier state under the Shah. All right, so a majority of the people, because of the lavish lifestyle of the Shah, lived in poverty. Um, all money was kind of going out of the country, not coming into the country. And so the Shah lived the way he lived because of oil revenue from the rent payments made to Iran from uh, largely from the British and soon the Americans. So, in an attempt to try and bring uh, Iranian people back to popularity with the Shah is going to institute what is known as the White Revolution. And it's his reform program. Um, and he's going to finance a lot of public works projects like heavy industry projects, steel, that kind of thing, including profit sharing for industrial workers. So, sharing some of the profit of industry to the worker. He also is going to encourage reforms in agriculture, um, entrepreneurship, irrigation, construction of canals, dams, those kinds of things. Granted women more political power, the right to vote, restricting polygamy, and women who are now able to work outside the home. Poured a lot of government money in the White Revolution to education, especially in rural areas where illiteracy rates were really high. But the outcome was that only a small percentage of the population seemed to benefit from the reform programs because it really wasn't meant to truly be a reform program, but rather a way to placate the masses so they don't rise up against the Shah. So in the 1980s, we see a resurgence party. And the resurgence party is going to institute what are known as ISI policies, um, and we're going to start to see a movement towards totalitarianism, which, of course, again, this is our road to the Iranian Revolution. So in 1975, the Shah created a one party state for the Majlis, and it's called the Resurgence Party, requiring all Iranian citizens to join and pay dues. Um, and this was a way for people to participate in their government, and this is the real thing, the Resurgence Party was kind of a way to control the population, give them an outlet where they felt like they were participating, but in essence they were under their control. This was especially targeting the bazaars, these urban marketplace small business owners who managed to retain some independence from the government. So this was a way to try and pull them into government control. So by 1979, the Shah promoted what are known as ISI policies, or import substitution industrialization policies. Oil and associated industries provided 97% of foreign exchange and a majority of Iran's GNP. So basically, ISI policies are government run policies. So there is a lot of nationalization involved in this. There's a lot of um, heavy government interaction in ISI policies. So oil revenue became so great, the government did not have to rely on internal taxes anymore because of all of this money being generated in the late 1970s by oil. And so, because they didn't care so much about taxes anymore, they no longer were accountable to the taxpayer. So, the people became increasingly unnecessary to the government in this rentier state. So, the state started to control banks and media, Iranian oil company. Armed forces grew to the fifth largest in the world. The Majlis became a rubber stamp legislature. Um, and and so this became very Western. So as a result, the Shah is going to lose popularity, lose support, because he violated political culture. First, he created a totalitarian state. He was a patrimonial ruler, meaning that all power flowed to the top. He also secularized too much and too fast, upsetting the religious clerics, and of course his ties to the West, and that offended Iranian nationalism. So a charismatic ruler by the name of Ayatollah Khomeini is going to start to rise up, and he's going to defend Islamic fundamentalism, emphasizing the common man, emphasizing Islam and Shia Islam. He resented the elite. He resented the U.S. He resented the West. There's a concept called jurist guardianships, the idea that the chief interpreter of Islam, the highest ranking cleric, like Khomeini, needed to be responsible for all aspects of Iranian society. And so he was operating in the best interest of the common man and the Shia community. And so it was due to his cult of personality that we're going to see people follow Ayatollah and create essentially a revolution. So, two factors caused the spark to initiate the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Oil prices decreased by 10% in the late 1970s, and at the same time, consumer prices increased. So, again, food cost more, and not oil money was coming in. So, little money to reinvest back in the Iranian economy, and religious leaders angry with the Shah for too much westernization. We're going to see that they're going to spark a revolution in which the Shah will be forced again to flee Iran. All right, that ends this frame. We'll talk again tomorrow.